A new season brought forth by a new year. What new dangers, what new knowledges, what discoveries, and what stories will we uncover? For all of these and more can be found here at the Lair of Omnisci in this, our third season. Hello friends, I am Omnisci. A little bit low-key today. We're not doing anything too serious, but I thought I'd go through some of my social groups and Facebook and kind of tick off a few questions that people pose. Those of you who come to the Lair of Omnisci might have similar questions or might be interested in how I answer some of these. So we'll just hit a few. Names will not be included to protect the guilty, potentially. And also, I'm not going to mention exactly which groups these are because they're all role-playing game groups. I mean, if you go onto Facebook, there's lots and lots of them, especially if you're looking for a special interest, you have a particular game you're interested in looking for that isn't Dungeons & Dragons. A lot of these Facebook groups cater to their very loyal bases. There's only one that I routinely go to, and that's my Twilight 2000 group, because I think they're a fun group generally. Many of them are veterans and or are actually in the military, and they have a very strong opinion on military stuff, which can be fun to watch. I, as a non-military person, sometimes can just stand back and just watch, and I get some of the humor. I don't get, obviously, some of the in-camp stuff, but, it's still pretty fascinating. And those people really love that game. So, first question. What do you think is the best alignment? I think chaotic good is the best alignment. Okay. Well, best, in this case, can be a couple of things. Best as in most easy to play. Back in the day, alignment was something that you had held over your head, and if you broke your alignment, you would get beaten down with things like experience penalties or maybe a forced alignment change, and the loss of a level, I know, was one of the penalties that I'd seen before. Not as much fun, honestly, and not a very accurate description of human behavior. I mean, we change all the time. Alignment is a hard thing to just put into a box. I know some people love the idea that personality types can be tested and quantified, but you really don't know how people will deal when different stressors show up, and some people will have a bit more fluidity and do things that aren't considered good or considered lawful, when otherwise they're generally decent people when left to their own devices. So ease of play, most people generally would say, is going to be the alignment that fits closest to their personalities and predilections. And if you're playing something that's different from you, for example, if you're somebody like me, I'm fairly lawful. I generally believe in following laws and rules. I don't have a problem with them, as long as they're reasonable and credible. And generally, I'm good. I do work for the welfare of other people. I generally try to promote, harmony and goodwill where I go, be that social media, be that in everyday life. So generally, I think my inclinations are towards law and good. On the other hand, given particular situations, I might drift from that. It's not an ironclad alignment for me. But I don't have a problem playing characters that are lawful good. Can be pretty good at it. So, and that fits me pretty well. Some people really like neutrality because their thought is, well, I can go one way, I can go the other. Doesn't matter, I'm neutral. As long as I balance things out fairly well, or it makes sense at the time, it works. For the same reason, some people really like chaos. Chaos is like, I can do anything. I could be nice, or I could just be a jerk just because I want to. The only problem is how some people play those character classes and races and alignments all blend together in such a way that almost any alignment can be used to justify almost any kind of behavior. If you want to be an absolute jerk to the rest of your group, you could be a lawful good jerk. Paladins had a pretty bad rap for a lot of people playing them and lording it over everyone else. But As far as my personal inclinations are generally to figure out what suits you the best for what your outlook and your particular, perspective on a game. If you are playing as a fantasy trip and you don't want to be bound by laws, you're greater than the law, then a lawful alignment isn't necessarily going to be the one that lets you fulfill the character fantasy that you're looking for. If, on the other hand, you're naturally kind of a free spirit and you want to try something different, it's a challenge to play something that's more structured and rigid and doesn't try to go outside the lines. But it may be something that's a little more stressful for you to try to play that and limit yourself consciously in that way. Now, if you're talking about best as in what's the ideal a person should reach for, chaotic good could definitely be seen by a lot of people as being the best. As in, I want to do as good a job for other people as I can. I want, life to flourish. I want people to live their best lives. And I think that oppressive laws bring that down. So I think everybody should just be free to help other people as best as they can and do the best they can for themselves and the people around them. Problem is, chaos doesn't work very well in a society. I would say neutral good has all the advantages of that. Feeling like the law is great, it helps to guide life, but honestly, going outside of that to help other people and maybe working towards new laws or working towards just a general feeling that people can do good without needing to be told to do good, I think neutral good is the best example that we have of living that kind of a righteous life, if that's what you're looking for. So that's my natural inclinations. Now, if you live in a society where the laws are created with the bent towards good, then a lawful good society could be the best. But, most societies generally don't tend towards pure good because pure good is difficult to dictate. The most you can really do is dictate decency. Don't hurt other people. You don't necessarily have to stretch out your hand to help everybody. That's good, as we understand it. And expecting everybody to do that, not very realistic. At least not in our society, certainly. But you can dictate decency. Don't hurt other people. Don't take other people's belongings. Just generally follow the edicts of, say, as postulated in a popular religion's 10 Commandments. Don't do bad things. It doesn't tell you to go and do good things all the time. It just says, don't do these bad things. And that's enough for what some people think. That's as far as law should go. Everything else, as far as good and evil, is relative to the society. So, what's your favorite homebrew race to play? I don't really prefer homebrew races because I think there's a lot of meat on the bones of the races that are included. And I haven't found a lot of really compelling homebrew races, to be honest with you. But if you want to go out and you want to look at different, races from other systems or settings, I consider those to be almost homebrewed, which, is fine. Especially if they don't show up in a D&D race book or something like that. In that case, I would pick some of the ones from my friends at GUI Cube. And right now, what I really am liking are the Aetherians. They are kind of an airy, very magical race, and they're kind of capricious. Their fancies can go all over the place, but they can be very powerful magically. They don't have the races in GUI Cube's world of Xyanthe are deliberately not painted with a brush where they have to be good or evil. That's not in any of them where they're dictated how their outlook is. Just their general inclinations and what they enjoy, what they're culturally good at, and what sometimes some of their physiological advantages are. The Aetherians, kind of a bluish, pale blue-skinned race, generally with white hair, in all the arts I've seen at least. Really favor towards magic and freedom, and I think they're a really cool idea for a near-human race. And again, I'm not real fond of using, again, the term race. I prefer the peoples, so that's how generally I refer to different cultures and things. Race is, I think, almost better as something that's very, clinical. Your your race, species, stuff like that. But that's me. All right, another one. If you could banish the top problem at your gaming table immediately, what problem would it be? Well, I have a couple gaming tables. So I'm gonna just briefly talk about three. The first one is apathy. One of my groups is a kind of an older group. The folks are a little bit older, and many of them just kind of come to the table and just kind of enjoy. They don't add to the game a great deal. They just kind of, it's the thing they do. So they kind of sit back and they just kind of enjoy. I think they enjoy. They don't say much. And they just kind of are there. I mean, they act when their parts come up. They say what they do. They know how to roll the dice and all that. They're not an anchor. But I don't get the enthusiasm. I don't get the drive. And they're just there to kind of follow the plot. So one group, I wish I could banish their apathy and get them excited and energized and make characters that are interesting and dynamic, that want to do things and have personal goals and things. But, yeah. The other group that I have is a relatively new group. Got some very interesting and dynamic personalities. We have a very young player who is working on getting experience and confidence, which is fine. I would not begrudge him that journey. I certainly would never say that his lack of experience is something I would banish. I enjoy the challenge of helping him go down that road. It's exciting to me. The thing that I would probably banish in that group out of anything is I wish the circumstances were better, that we could all show up routinely and it was easy for us to all get to the table and show up on a consistent basis. For some, they go to school far away, so that's a little bit harder. We've had some health concerns. The whole COVID thing is a mess. And I wish I could just make it so that every other week we can show up, everybody would be here, because everybody, I think, wants to. It's a good group, and I'm really having a lot of fun with it. I'd also have one player who I wish would stop looking at their phone while we're playing, but I will be addressing that personally. The final group I'd like to talk about is my hobby shop group, which unfortunately hasn't met for a year now. It's kind of killing me because they were a great group of kids. They were so enthusiastic and they had such a good time. The only thing that I would banish is sometimes they kind of got a little scattershot. Which is natural. Their enthusiasm and their outlooks and their expressions are all very unique to them, and every single player had a need and a drive to do so. Some of them didn't like the spotlight as much. They wanted to be a part of the group, but they didn't necessarily want to lead it. Other ones didn't really want to lead it. They just wanted to do stuff. Whether or not anybody else followed them, they just wanted to keep doing stuff. And it was like trying to herd cats in occasions, which is good. It's good for me as a game master to grow and get experience with things like that. But it was a little distracting. It was hard to build a really good story around that. But God bless them. They were great kids. I would love to have them at the table more often, and I can't wait to have the whole COVID thing lifted so that I can get back to playing with these kids, because they're great and I hope they never lose that. So, simple answer. Personally, outside of a few challenges, I think for the most part, most of my groups always, have strong features somewhere. I don't think I really have a group that I would ever just get rid of. There's always something you can work for. Unless there are horrible people out there that I don't really ever want to game with, who intentionally create problems and the like. So, but we hope that they, find other tables with, other people around. So, all right. Let's see. We will find something else. Lots and lots of people who are artists want to sell you their services as illustrating your stuff, and I think we should. I think it's good to patronize the arts, especially if they are really talented, and if they're mugging for work on Facebook. That means that they don't have the fortune of being somebody's house artist where they're getting a steady paycheck for putting out art. Support them if you can. Now, don't get me wrong, if some guy like slaps together some stuff and says, hey, I do art, you want some? Unless they're really cheap, you know, encourage them to get better. More videos. Anyway, what is one of your guys' funniest D20 roll? My funniest was actually last session. What had happened is that I found what I thought was gold, but turns out was fool's gold, and I thought it would be funny to throw it at our paladin. Hit a natural 20, did 1 damage, but he retaliated and smote me with the rock, doing 7 damage. I don't think that's funny, really. Kind of sad, quite honestly. I think what I think is the funniest D20 basically happens every other week at my Mighty Protectors table. You see, I am of the sort that generally feels that a die is a random number generator, that if I roll this die, it has an equal chance of coming up on any face, on any given roll, except that game. Because things get horrible. These characters that are pretty competent at what they do will consistently flub roll after roll after roll after roll after roll. It's hilariously bad comedy on just how disastrous the dice can be for that game. And it's consistent. It's consistently terrible luck these guys have. Oh, they have enough successes that they get through scenarios. They don't get wiped out on easy encounters. Sure, they're actually quite powerful superheroes. But it's just hilarious how bad luck just kind of sits on their doorstep and waits and waits and waits and waits and roll after roll. That's a critical failure. That's a critical failure. A critical failure happens 1 in 20 chance. You know, in any given roll, we generally honor the critical failure, critical success principle. So in Mighty Protectors, you want to roll low. Critical successes are on a 1, critical failures are on a 20. On a given night, we generally see, and I don't require rolls for absolutely everything, so rolls, you know, if you're going to fight something in combat, you make a roll. If you are going to try to do something involving a skill or an ability, you make a roll, and that's about it. So a given person can make about, 7 or 8 rolls a night, maybe up to 10 to 15, but that's if there's, a fair amount of combat. It's not roll, 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 roll. There's an average in our group of 4 people. There's usually about 8 to 10 20s that are rolled in a given night. Now, granted, I roll a bit too, and I get some 20s in every now and again too, but their luck is so bad. And I have nothing but joy in my heart trying to narrate how some of their well-intentioned things can just go awry. And if you're interested in how that works and a blow-by-blow on that, go ahead to my playlist for State of the Dungeon and check out the odd entries under Mighty Protectors, and I reveal all the different ways that things blow up in their face or they screw up. Because they're cursed. It's shocking to me just how bad it gets. And occasionally they do get the odd critical success, but I swear, I'm not exaggerating. For every 1 critical success, there's about 5 to 10 critical failures. No exaggeration at all on that number. It's insane. It's crazy. Now, if we ever switch to D&D, that'll flip. It's luck. It's not a matter of the dice being off or anything like that. So that's my answer for that. Okay. This is a cute little story. I love these little meme type stories. Context. The party is traversing a mountain pass in a blizzard, a la Lord of the Rings scene, if you've seen where they're trying to go over Moria instead of through it. The DM has everyone roll a die to see if they don't fall down the cliff. The dwarf warrior in heavy plate armor fails the check. A heavy gust of wind pushed you off the path. You slip and fall off the cliff. What do? The dwarf. I flap my arms really hard. Seriously? It's not like I got better options. Okay, roll a die. Natural 20. Roll again. Natural 20. With astonished looks on their faces, the party behold a most miraculous sight. A dwarf in heavy armor is slowly rising up in the air above the cliff edge by flapping his arms really, really freaking hard. According to all known laws of aviation, there's no way a dwarf should be able to fly. Its arms are too small to get its sturdy little body off the ground, and they aren't wings. The dwarf, of course, flies anyway because dwarves don't care what humans think is impossible. That's cute. I'm thinking about multiclassing my Oath of Vengeance Paladin with a Hexblade Warlock. Has anyone else here done this? How did it work out for you? See, here's the thing that makes me sad about modern games. I don't give a toss about what your Oath of Vengeance Paladin found so traumatic in his life that he decided he didn't want the paladining anymore and decided he needed to be a Hexblade Warlock. You're doing it for the build. You're doing it for the powers and stuff, and it has nothing to do with the role-playing of it. It has nothing to do with the world of it. Look, the god that's supporting you, being an Oath of Vengeance Paladin, wants you to keep paladining. That's why they give you the rank of skills that you've got. And you're like, you know, it's all good. I'm going to go off and be a warlock now. That's not a lot of conviction there that would sustain being a paladin. You're pretty flip-floppy. Now, I'm not saying there aren't circumstances that could do it, especially if your patron is, you know, you're like, I need more blasting power, my lord. Okay, here, I'll teach you this other subset of skills that I have for a different group, but if you're interested in extra credit, here you go, have warlocky stuff. Ooh, cool. Now I can blast people for vengeance. Tying the two together, I could kind of see it. I don't know why different deities aren't considered really as proper patrons for warlocks. It always seems like it's somebody on the skirts edge of it, with celestials, but not the deities themselves. The agents of the celestials are the ones that can grant warlocky powers. The archfiends and stuff, not the infernal deities, but, you know, the fiends like, you know, Asmodeus and creatures like that. The archfey, not the gods of nature, not Obed-Hai or Alona or, you know, whoever. No, it's you know, Oberon and Titania. I think the deities would be a good, you know, patron because, again, they're doubly motivated there. They, you know, I could teach you how to blow things up. You should see some of the other things I give, but yeah, I could teach you how to blow things up like a warlock. So in that, I could kind of see it, but I'm not going to give advice on builds. I don't do builds. That's other groups do that. You won't see too many build videos here. You know, objectively looking at it, considering that most of your powers, to the best of my knowledge as a paladin, get channeled through your weapon, I think a Hexblade Warlock is probably the warlock that makes the most sense because there's basically ties into a weapon. So I'm sure he's doing it because he's combining some sort of smite ability with some kind of Hexblade Warlocky power that will allow them to do possibly multiple actions. Maybe casting a smite, holding it in concentration, and then attacking, unleashing the smite, and doing something else. But most of the time, you have to remember that you can't cast two spells at once, so you'd have to basically spend your action, reserving your smite, hitting something. With another action, it's something you would do every once in a while for burst damage, which I guess in encounters, burst damage is everything, isn't it? Most encounters are over, and then the group just sits down and rests and gets their powers back. So, you know, it is what it is. It's probably a fairly strong combination. You know, the warlock gets you some blasting power if you want Eldritch Blast, so you can shoot things, and because the effectiveness of cantrips isn't tied down by your actual class level, it's by your total levels. That Eldritch Blast is still going to be as powerful as if you were straight warlock all the way through. You just won't necessarily have all the invocations to pump it up. But you'll get enough, and you're most interested in the Hexbladey stuff anyhow, so it's probably fine. Again, though, a little part of me weeps for the fact that it doesn't sound like this came in through role-playing at all and developing the characters. It's all just trying to hit your build points, and there are people who like that. That's not me. not my game. But yeah, so that's my thought. This is one I answered kind of flippantly, but you have 3 4th level characters to build. Your mission: survive as many 5 to 7 challenge rating monsters as you can, one after the other, without any short or long rests. What do you make and why? You have control of all 3 characters and everything in 5th edition except for Unearthed Arcana, Matt Mercer creations, so no willed amount, and homebrew or non-play-tested books or web erratas allowed. Game rules used are read as written. Normal roll 20 ability point buy with blah, 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 blah. Battle maps are unknown and varied. Some might have terrain, some might be small 6x6, 30-foot rooms and no doors. You have to be prepared for anything. A random monster will be generated and your tiny 3-man party needs to kill it, and every randomly generated monster that spawns thereafter. You never get a short rest, it's just wave after wave. Your goal is to see how many you can survive before your group eventually goes down for the count. You can't just vanish into a warlock genie ring compartment and have your imp familiar carry your invincibly, or climb to a rope trick and rest up, blah blah. My friends and I came up with the cauldron idea where scenarios are played out. Okay, number 1, I don't find any real challenge in this. I don't really enjoy it. That's me. I know there are people who love the tactics of D&D. To me, I think the combat encounters are there to let you use all those wonderful abilities that you have, but they're really, to me, secondary to the role-playing and building a story and advancing the campaign. There are times, though, when the climax combats are very important, and in there is an art to it. But this whole, here, give me this scenario and do this, and then one battle after the other. If you're getting into battle after battle with monsters that are rated a bigger challenge rating than your group is, you failed at something down the road, or your DM is really a jerk. My response, I was a little flippant. I said, yeah, give me 3 College of Lore bards. Because screw you. I don't want to do your game. I don't want to do this. This doesn't sound fun to me. They would have a short but glorious career. The advantage, of course, the bards, though, is that they have the potential for healing word. They can keep healing each other. So if, they get into a bad way, but generally they don't have the firepower to take on that kind of encounter. You need at least a tank, maybe 2, and some healing. So I would say a paladin and a fighter, and then you'd probably want a mage of some sort to do burst damage efficiently. You could get by with a rogue, as long as you can keep the rogue from taking punishment, because they're going to have bad armor class, and many monsters are intelligent in that challenge rating and will turn and just waste your rogue so that they can ignore the fighters and just kill the rogue as quickly as possible so they don't have to worry about that extra damage. So, I don't know. That's as much of an answer as I'll give to that. But again, that's just me. If you love that stuff, have at it. Another thing, too, is that challenge rating 5 to 7 really can vary in terms of how difficult they are. Some 5 to 7 range are blobs of hit points. A single strong attack and a blob of hit points. I think there's some giants that are in that area. On the other hand, there are some that don't have as many hit points, but they're horrible for spell-like abilities or actual spells, or many attacks that do a lot of damage. So that's a tough range. And if you don't know what it is and it's random, well, it's hard to prepare for everything. It really is. It's also kind of sad seeing all these people who are like, please somebody have a group with me in it. I know, I'm sad. Okay. How do you feel about solo adventures? I'm thinking about trying it out just because I'm curious. I've said this before on this channel and also on my Omnisci Facebook channel, where I sometimes post videos. If you're curious and like a little bit more entertainment, check it out. Omnisci on Facebook. It's a page. I frequently post things and try to get people to comment and enjoy. So, I don't think very much of solo play. That's me. Again, some people really like it. I don't find much point in it. Outside, it passes the time, sure. But I think that solo play, and again, generally what solo play means is that you're playing a randomly generated adventure. Be it with cards, be it with dice, random tables, what have you. You make a character, or are given a character, and you're presented with a series of challenges. There is no role play as far as playing with NPCs, because who's doing it? No one. There is no one to role play off of. So it's just basically a combat exercise or a dice rolling exercise, and that's it. To me, that's all it is, and I can think of much more fun things to do. At least video games give you a story that makes sense and is concrete and starts somewhere and goes somewhere. At least a game book has an interesting story. It has some very rudimentary game mechanics, something like Lone Wolf, which, by the way, if you never played Lone Wolf, check out the Aeon Initiative, AEON, I believe it's called, where Joe Dever, the author of Lone Wolf, made his stuff available for free online. So you have no excuse. Go check it out. And if you want to have some fun resource material, the Magnamon Companion on the Aeon site is excellent for his world of Magnamon. It's got a lot of great ideas for, the Geek language and ideas for magic. It's really cool. I highly recommend it. But I'm not a huge fan of random. I don't care for random tables all that much, and deciding what's going to happen next by dice roll doesn't really thrill me all that much. Especially since, too, in the face of just cold randomness, you could have incredibly unfair odds that crush you without remorse because there's no intelligence behind it. It's just whatever bad luck you had rolling. Or it can be incredibly easy with, things that perfectly match your skills that you just tromp through. So, some people really like them, though, and I'm sure there are some games that allow you to kind of tailor things a bit, and I know there's a number of them that have really kind of sprung up with the whole COVID isolation issue, giving people things to do, and that's cool. I personally don't find them to be all that appealing, but some people like them, and that's cool. To each their own. And I've had them explained to me when I've gone to cons and saw people hawking their solo game, and it's like, tell me all about it, and it's like, okay. But it's all comes down to just random, right? There's no elements. No, you don't have to run your own game. It's all decided for you. Okay, no, not for me. But if you try it and find you like it, I find that the ones that probably would be the most interesting would be something like a solo module. For instance, I remember back in, I think it was 2nd edition, Midnight in Dagger Alley, was a thief adventure. So you would play a thief, and you would go through, and they use that red lens to reveal hidden messages so that you couldn't see in advance what different areas had. You'd have to use the lens and look and see what was printed out. It was in blue ink, but when you used the red lens, it wiped out all the red that was covering the ink, and the blue would show as black, and you could read what was there. It was a clever technique. Certainly had been used for quite a while. I remember using that for those red slips of paper that used to come with the the Transformers statistics. You could read it with the red. It was kind of cool. But yeah, I really not a huge fan, but, again, to each their own. I'm not going to discourage anybody from trying them, certainly. And if you find that you really like them as a way of passing the time, enjoy them. Some people hate video games. I like video games, not to the extent that I used to, but I do like to, turning off my brain and pop into a video game from time to time. And I've kind of gotten back into some retro gaming because I'm getting older and nostalgia is a powerful drug. But, some people never really want to play role-playing games for video games, and, I don't understand. I understand the appeal of video games, but I never really want to lose my love for role-playing games with other people, so. Again, that's a me thing. That's not necessarily a you thing, and there's nothing wrong with those games if you like them. So. Alright, here's a question. What do you do to make your game more immersive? Now, sometimes you want immersive and sometimes you don't. For instance, in my game that I'm running Castle Caldwell and Beyond. That's, I believe, B9 from the Dungeons & Dragons adventure series. I don't want it to be terribly immersive. We're going for more of an old school approach, so I'm not using miniatures. I'm going purely descriptive theater of the mind. They have a mapper. He is filling out the map before their eyes as they encounter room after room. When they open the door, I first reveal what their characters see, and then later they can map it out. But they react to what's presented in front of them first. And as immersive, I want them to take what I say and imagine the scenario as a way of building up their imaginations. I'm doing all of that intentionally. However, I'm still giving a nod to some immersive elements. For example, I have my little Philips Shockbox Bluetooth speaker that was hooked up to my phone, and I'm still playing some, adventure-y background music, streaming from Tabletop Audio. Props again to Tabletop Audio for the best free audio experience for games that I've ever come across, without all those pesky ads and things that you get from something like, YouTube. And really, I, use voice for characters, try to, immerse them with voice, so they can hear that it's not me talking, but you're talking to this trader, and this trader's from someplace else, you see, and he wants to travel in safety because he's not interested in a fight. I mean, he'll fight to defend himself if he needs to, but he doesn't want to fight you. You're a skilled adventurer with all the armor and the weapons and swords and bits and probably the magics. And he's just got himself his axe to defend himself with, and, if you attack me, it's murder, because I'm not going to fight you except in self-defense, see? I just wants to be left alone as much as possible, and if it's got to move to get out of your way, I'm going to get out of your way. Using voice to differentiate characters, very important. Providing sound descriptions. If you're fighting a fire beetle, the beetle's like... skitter. As much as my voice can hold up, sometimes it's harder than others. Did I ever mention that that Mountain Dew Major Melon Zero is terrible? But you can't have the sugary stuff. Ugh. So, those are the things that I do for animation. I myself am animated for them to try to do what I can to bring in their imagination. I will gesture, for example, for an incoming blow. I encourage them to be expressive and allow themselves to be immersed in the game. But that's as much as I can do for that. On purpose. There are games, however, where I pull out 3D miniatures and terrain and stuff and build a dungeon or build an encounter up before they get there, and then when they are ready to get into that encounter, I pull the curtain away, lift up the boards on the table to reveal that the encounter is already played out and ready for them to go. It lets them know that this is the big moment. It does take away a little from the spontaneity of it. It's like, I planned for this, so, all the stuff is in place, but I think it helps to, draw their attention and suck them in. So, that could be good. Also, I generally, occasionally I will use, incense to try to dispel and cover up the fact that we play in a basement. Because sometimes basements have their own smell. So, by using different scents, you can kind of, I'm not going to say you transport somebody to the coast by using an ocean breeze stick of incense, but it can help rather than smell like gain. So audio, a little scent. My lighting I generally like to see consistent because they have to read off their character sheets and stuff. So I have the shop light, which is muted by parchment paper, but it provides consistent and steady light. I have to change out pretty much. It's been yellowed a little too much, so a new sheet will whiten up the room a little bit more, which is good. That's might be why I look a little jaundiced, but yeah. So yes, that is what I do, and I have access to. And I think the players generally appreciate a little bit extra effort for their encounters. Anyway, hello, I wanted to gauge opinions on rolling for damage in RPGs. Do you think it's necessary, or could it be static? If it's a static amount, how do you think it would be? Oh, do you think it would be too boring? It depends, largely. I'll just say that. I'm not a fan of static because I like rolling damage. I think that there's a certain strength in it. On the other hand, I'm fine with doing a set amount of damage that can be modified. For instance, I'm not a huge fan, I think it's probably been said once or twice, I wasn't a huge fan when I first read the new Numenera rules, which eventually, is the cipher system for Monty Cook games. They use static damage. I think a small weapon does 1 point of damage, a medium weapon like a sword does 2 points of damage, a large weapon I think does 3 points of damage. Now, that can be modified, however. You can put more effort into a blow and do more. It just costs you some of your own personal resources. And if you make an exceptional strike, a very skilled strike, I believe it can do more damage as well. Which basically it all works out the same. If you spend the effort, you lower the difficulty so your strike is more skillful. I think it is really how it works out. It works because the system, takes that all into account. On the other hand, you can feel like you really have to put a lot of yourself into a single blow to really make it count. That can work in a certain narrative sense that you put everything you have into a shot and exhaust yourself a bit by, delivering a blow that can really injure somebody. On the other hand, I'm okay with the idea that sometimes you just get lucky and you can score a deep blow without having to exhaust yourself. There's a certain amount of chance that I'm okay with. So I'm fine with either way as long as there's a reason for it. For example, Dungeons & Dragons, it makes sense that it rolls extra dice because of the way the system works. It's very much, do you succeed or do you not? It's 100% pass or fail. And then after that, the amount that you succeed, it can be randomized again. We've all seen it. We've all accepted it for years. Honestly, it wouldn't be that hard, though, to say, okay, if you hit exactly what you needed to hit, you do the minimum damage. If you exceed the amount that you need to hit, you do more damage up to a certain level based on the weapon that you're using. So, for instance, if you hit somebody and you're using a greatsword and you hit 8 successes more than you needed to hit, you land a blow that does a full 8 points of damage plus whatever modifiers because you're hitting them with a big, great sword. On the other hand, if you just hit on the nose, then you hit a grazing blow that did minimum damage, 1 point plus whatever your modifiers are. That would cut down on the number of dice rolls. It creates a little bit more math in your head, but only a little bit. It could be done quite easily. So if you want to do that, that's cool. The downside to that is that means that a person who's wearing really big armor can only be chipped away at little bits at a time. You're not going to get this big killing blow. Unless, of course, you have critical hits, which blow those rules over. Like saying it allows a die roll on top of your base weapon damage, which, might be interesting. Little playtesting might bear that out. I think, allowing the magnitude of success based on your initial attack could be used quite well, though. If you value, and I actually kind of use that in my narratives, too. If you just missed by a point and they're using a shield, they deflected the shield at the last moment. Or if you just missed by 2 and they have a large dexterity, they sidestep the blow. Or no, they couldn't sidestep the blow. It still hits their armor, but they did try to twist out of the way of it. You can narrate that. If you hit by 3, you hit competently. Your blow gets inside of their guard. Whereas if you hit by 6 or 8, it's almost as if they're standing still and you just lay on with the kind of blow that you want. And then after that, how it comes off of them is based on the damage. So, I think it works for some things. I like rolling dice myself. I'm not terribly fond of static dice. Even, something like World of Darkness is, the original World of Darkness, your weapon had a set damage that you rolled for, a number of dice for, based on your success. And if you have more successes, you could drive that up, which was fine. And then guns actually do a set amount of damage. So like a shotgun does 8 points of damage, which you can drive up with successes, making it a very fearsome weapon and more than enough to cut your average person in half. But you get shot with a shotgun, you're probably not going to get up again. At least in the tactical setting that those games usually take place in. If you get shot, it's going to generally be in close range. There's not a lot of really long-range combat in those games. Not my experience, at least. All right, so that's my thoughts on that. Depends on the game. What single adventure exemplifies for you the perfect balance of content, color, background, and whatever that has made it a joy to bring to the table and run? And ideally, to do so with no to minimal prep other than reading the adventure before the session. And having stated that, a little context of why and how would be brilliant. No restriction on system or age of the adventure. If you homebrew everything and never use published adventures, there's no need to answer. I'm specifically looking for your ideal adventure and how or why it works so well. I've spent most of my gaming career homebrewing everything. It's only recently where I've realized that I've got so much material just sitting there, never been used. And it's time to bring it out to the fore and let other people try games that I didn't create myself. There's some really good ones. So, I would not recommend Castle Caldwell and Beyond. I think the adventure is mostly very low grade. To the point the guy who wrote it, or whoever wrote it, didn't even give the real name, unless there is a guy named Harry Knuckles. I don't think so. I'm sure it's a nom de plume. It's pretty eh. I did like the Princes of the Apocalypse storyline I ran, though. I thought that was quite well done. Gives you lots of branching paths. But I don't believe there's any game that you can run with minimum prep time. I think if you're going to run somebody else's work, you need to read it, you need to review it, you need to understand it, and have some stuff ready so you can run it effectively. Having the statistics easily at hand for encounters, for instance. You want to have that ready in advance. If you have cards and stuff, like the various monster cards and that 5th edition has put out, that's great. That cuts down on your prep time tremendously. I have these specs and I can look it up in a moment's notice. That's ideal. But if you don't know, for instance, what's in the rooms around where the players are having a huge brawl, those creatures would hear that and react in some way. Maybe running away, maybe moving in to investigate and causing more complications. And if you don't do that and every encounter is just another room that they find, you're not really doing the encounter or the world around them any justice. So if the monsters are that unmotivated for their own defense and well-being, then they're pretty dumb. Almost everything would somehow react to a lot of noise like a fight nearby. So if you haven't read in advance on that and they just come to the next room and, oh, well, there's 7 more creatures in this room, didn't have a door, they would have heard everything. They're just still standing around and you catch them by surprise. That's dumb and it's bad game mastering, honestly. So I think everything requires a certain amount of prep time to be any good. Barring weird circumstances, like every time you go through a door, you pass through a dimensional gate to some other random place that isn't connected to all the others. Well, okay, I guess that's really taking a large leap, but that would obviate the need to read in advance, I guess, to some extent. But that's about it. But Princes of the Apocalypse gave you all the resources you need to tell a pretty good story, including a number of good side quests. Nothing extraordinary, but something that could tie up a couple of nights with a hunt for a relic axe, for instance, that the party might be able to find. My group never followed on that, so it's still lying in that valley. But, it's there. There was, about 8, I think, separate side quests in that game that you could just throw out as something else your players can do in that situation, rather than have to stick to the story, which is nice. Can stretch things out a little bit, give them a chance to bulk up a little bit before a major encounter, so that's not bad. I liked this kind of sandboxy way that the the encounter was structured so that the players could go in the area that they wanted to pursue rather than necessarily be spoon-fed along or just thrown into this huge sprawling dungeon that those get old. Breaking the dungeons up into bite-sized chunks I thought worked pretty well. It gave them plenty of time to rest and recuperate between sections of the temple. And it worked out really well as far as I'm concerned. I know some people think it's a kind of a weak adventure for what it was worth, but I thought it was really easy to run and gave this definite sense of scalability, moving upward and getting consistently more and more difficult. So I liked it myself. Thought it was a pretty good example of decent dungeon design. The best one I usually hold up, though, is I6 Ravenloft from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It was written by, I think it was Hickman, Tracy Hickman, and I'm pretty sure. But it was a masterpiece in giving you a rich culture to play off of with the Vistani. It gave you a really good villain as far as Strahd. I mean, he's been immortalized. He's had his own campaign world. He's had, who else has done that? Nobody. It was such a compelling adventure. And the idea that even if you've run it before, you don't know how the layout goes because it's randomized to a certain extent. Not a tremendous extent, but enough that you can't just take everybody past all the tick off the boxes and get to the end. No, it's a really good game at building atmosphere and putting you into that world and scaring the daylights out of you, quite honestly, if you're not prepared for something like that. It was a great adventure. And I had a blast when I did it. Running it was challenging, especially since I ran out of time when I ran it, but it's an excellent adventure. Highly recommended. Written by a master writer, so that's never a bad thing. Hi everybody, long story short, old-fashioned GM, like to break into running things online, namely Roll20. I've played around with the software a bit, but I know I'm far from expert. Would you have any suggestions, tips, and tricks for making a good game in Roll20? Thanks in advance. Roll20, like most things, depends on having stuff. So, maps that you can put out in advance. If you can get the digital maps for stuff, that's a bonus. Having tokens, basically just like having miniatures, except the game is much more reliant on that stuff if you're using Roll20 using the built-in software. On the other hand, if you're doing Theater of the Mind like I do and just using the tabletop on Roll20 to write notes and stuff, I think that's an effective way of running games too. So if you don't want to deal with all the graphics and stuff, unless you're doing a dungeon crawl, I think it's perfectly fine to just use Roll20. I also think it's just fine, though, to use Discord. Just snag a dice bot, and your Discord can serve as a log of everything that's happened. I think that's valid just as well. So, again, Discord does not give you the option, though, of using dungeons and tokens and things, where Roll20, that's a strength. I suspect that games like systems like Fantasy Grounds and that other one, Forge, I think, are perfectly fine in the same way, though. So sometimes it's just how much you're willing to spend. If you're willing to buy the maps and tokens and stuff, makes your game look a lot prettier and helps people to get into the game more. I'm game on a budget, so all my money has been gone into physical stuff, so I would make basically one that's more Theater of the Mind myself. Obviously, there's going to be people who can give much more useful advice for something like that and exactly the hows and how to start and everything. Bunkers and Badasses, a Borderlands tabletop role-playing game, is coming out soon, and I'm so excited as I love this game series. Anyone else excited, and what series would you want to be adapted into a tabletop role-playing game? Borderlands, I think, is only interesting because the characters make it interesting. I don't think there's anything too revolutionary about the gameplay. It's a good looter shooter. But I think it's the attitude and the personality of the game that really makes it stand out. So if you can convey that in a kind of a higher tech Wild West scenario, then I'm good. Cool. Awesome. Do it. Absolutely. I would play in something like that, and it's going to be the game master's skill and how good of a grasp they have on the world and putting me into that world for me that would determine if I'm going to think it's a great game or not. It's going to be largely dependent on the person running the game and how good the game does at giving elements that let you play that. Also, as far as video game mechanics and things like that, several of the characters would do things that, don't typically make sense in a simulationist game, especially when we get to Borderlands 2 when you start getting some of the more esoteric powered characters. But I think I would have a lot of fun with it. I think it could be a lot of fun with the right people. The other thing, too, is how empty of a world are you going to have? The very first world, the first Borderlands 1, felt like everybody was a robot, or there's only a couple of NPCs that you ever met, and everybody else is crazed and trying to kill you. So, giving it more life to that world might certainly be an interesting thing to see. What would I like to see as a tabletop role-playing game? It would be nice to see an official Harry Potter role-playing game. I know there's a number of homebrews, but I think it's a shame that somebody doesn't go to JK and say, hey, I want to make this game. I've got rules and everything. If you give it your blessing and, look it over and see if there's everything's cool. As far as I know, that's never happened, so I think that would be a good one to have. So many other ones, like Doctor Who, that have had their own, and there's a number of Transformer-ish games. I know one of my friends, Jacob Blackman, did some excellent art for one. He is really good. If you have never looked at his stuff, I highly recommend checking him out. He's very good. But otherwise, what would I really like to see? The Witcher has its own role-playing game, so the popularity of that series isn't going to go unrewarded with a role-playing game, because they've got theirs. From what I've heard, it's okay. Conan's got a really solid one with Modiphius. Heck, even John Carter from Mars has one from Modiphius, so that's good. They've been really hitting a lot of keys with role-playing games for various IPs, which is fine. I guess one I wouldn't mind seeing, it'd be interesting to see how they could do, would be Quantum Leap. The idea of, throwing yourself into another time period in somebody else's body and doing a scenario-based, trying to accomplish this so that you can leap out and try to get back home. Could be really cool. I'm not sure how it would work. Could be kind of neat, but that's always been one of those IPs I thought that had an interesting premise, and I kind of thought that it was clever, and you could move forward with that. So, when you write a new player character, what's the one most important thing you need to write and why? I'm talking about the one element you most rely on in order to sit down at the table and start role-playing. Well, quite honestly, it's the core concept of the character, really. If you don't understand the core concept of the character, if you couldn't encapsulate your character in just a couple of words, a phrase, maybe a sentence, then you don't really have a great grasp on your character. So it makes it a lot harder. So, for example, Corbrecht is a professional, defensive-minded dwarven wizard. And to me, all of those things have their own meaning. As far as he's worried about efficiency. He's worried about being a competent spellcaster, practicing his spells again and again until he's perfect with them, and not being willing to settle for anything less. Defensive-minded. He's not the one who's going to throw the first fireball. He's almost always going to be the one who's reserving so he can counterspell or dispel magic anything that comes up before he starts leveraging his magic, and ready to do that if it's needed, but primarily holding himself in reserve for whatever else is needed in a given encounter. As far as being a dwarf, that means more than just having a +1 or +2 to his constitution. That means that he takes a look at the long view of an encounter, not necessarily needing to rush ahead. It's sizing up an enemy, taking calculated risks rather than blowing everything on a single encounter. It means being willing to do the hard work and enduring challenges rather than desperately scrabbling to come up against anything that he sees. Instead, intelligently looking at things and thinking, all right, I know what we've seen so far, and I can predict certain things from you, and I'm going to figure out a way that we don't necessarily have to win now, but we will win eventually. We will, overcome. And then as a wizard, looking at a scenario from outside and thinking, how can I change this with my will in order to make it work for me? Not necessarily what spell can I cast, but sometimes how can I take magic and lever that into the scenario so we win the way that I want to win. And that varied too. One time I decided I wanted to be a Jedi, so I took Shadow Blade, I took Suggestion, I took Telekinesis, to catapult, to launch things at people, to Jedi mind trick folks. It was amusing. I could do whatever I wanted because I'm a wizard. Dang it, it was awesome. I loved that character. But by doing that, I could make sure that I was always playing as Corbrecht the wizard, more so than just whatever appealed to me. I was playing in character, and that really helped by having that core concept. And that works for every role-playing game, too. In every role-playing game, a core concept of what it is that you really want to play is important if you care about the quality of the role-playing you're going to be doing. So, you and your group get stuck on an island for the rest of your life. You only have access to one rulebook for one game, some character sheets for that game, and some dice. Which game do you choose and why? If the island is that small, then my life probably isn't going to be all that long. I'm not much of a survivalist, so I guess spending my time gaming is as productive as anything. But for any one game, I would choose Dungeons & Dragons. Why? Dungeons & Dragons is a perfectly serviceable game, but if I get the dice for Dungeons & Dragons, then I can take those dice and do almost anything with it. I could recreate my own personal game dice file. And I can always write on the back of the character sheet if I want to. Didn't take in any pencils though, so that's kind of suck. And if you only get a couple, who knows how long you're going to play it. But yeah, and my group, I don't think I have anybody in my groups. Well, no, one of my groups might do pretty good because we got a couple people who are a little bit more survival minded than I am. But otherwise, one of my groups, we just roll over and die, I think, pretty quickly. All right. What's your favorite Arabian Nights / Aladdin / 1001 Nights inspired tabletop RPG and why? Well, you're talking about something in Arabic-like setting, often set in a desert. Al-Qadim comes to mind, the D&D setting set in that kind of an environment. It's really one of the few I've ever played. Most of the players, it's not a matter of racism, it's merely a lack of cultural perception. Don't have a lot of people of the Middle Eastern descent where I live. Just plainly, I don't see very many. So it's not a culture that we often think about or is thrust on us, and honestly, there aren't a whole lot of them as far as role-playing games and settings. I know there's one called City of Brass. I was looking at the hobby shop the other day and thinking about picking up. Scratch and dent sale. Haven't had any real feedback on that, but I haven't looked. Something I should look into. I also have another one that I picked up through the Facebook Buy Sell Trade called Secret of Shulzarm or something like that. I can't remember. It looked interesting at first glance. I thought, oh, okay, this might be a good Arabic themed. And then I looked it over, and it doesn't really seem like that is the theme of it. It's kind of looked a little post-apocalyptic-y. So I'm not sure. But that might be a good one. It's something that's on my list of games to run in 2021, so we'll see. But Al-Qadim was the only one that I played, and even that for just 2 sessions. It's never been something that I've ever really done myself. And again, I'm trying to make myself better and expand out and try different things, so maybe? We'll see. Here's another one. This one I wanted to respond to. The Call of Cthulhu Death Run. Several years ago, my RPG group was between campaigns, so I decided to run a Call of Cthulhu one-shot, but with a bit of a twist. I told my players to roll up investigators and then told them that this was going to be a death run. My goal was to attempt to kill as many of them as I could by session's end. At the end of the night, one investigator was still alive and my players were hooked. Since then, I've evolved a few loose rules to run the game by. 1. Hardcore stat rolls. Roll down the stat list and what you get is what you get. When finished, I allowed one stat reroll, but you must take the new result even if it's worse than the original. All combat skills max out at 50%. A player may use a luck roll to ignore any roll that I make, usually a mortal hit. If they fail the roll, too bad. If they succeed, they avoid the bad thing, but they lose half their luck, so it eventually runs out. Leave one alive. Once the second to last investigator dies, it's game over. The last person standing somehow survives. That investigator gets 66 to spend on skills, and they get to participate in the next death run. I don't know that any character has survived 2 death runs, but there's always a first time. Once a PC dies, his or her player gets to run a monster. Deadly but fair. Obviously, it would be easy to simply have Cthulhu himself show up and wipe out the entire group in one fell swoop, but that's no fun. I'm trying to kill them, but the players have to have some hope of being the final survivor. I think that's about it. We use old school 4th edition Call of Cthulhu rules because they're simple and it's what I own. It's super fun for both myself and the players when I can finally take the gloves off and they know full well that I'm out to kill them. The drama is real and some hilarious situations occur while the old adage of, I don't have to be faster than the monster, I just have to be faster than my buddy comes into play. Anyone else done anything similar? Okay, first of all, I personally find the idea anathema to the way that I run a game. I don't like killing player characters. I think if you go through the effort of making a character, it's up to me to try to entertain you by telling a good story. Now, if you like this kind of thing, I'm cool with it. And it sounds like his group likes it, so awesome. And I don't consider this to be masochistic, by the way. It's a different way of running. The problem that I have with it myself is that I find Call of Cthulhu works best as a horror game. This is not horror. It's not. I know you're thinking, wait, it sounds pretty horrible, but it's not really. It's a splatter gore fest maybe, but there's no horror. Why? You were told your character's going to die. What attachment are you ever going to have? There's no connection to the character. You just rolled a character, a Joe Schmo at random, and kitted him out and pushed him out into the street to die. And yeah, maybe your character has a chance in surviving just basically by outlasting everyone else, but there's no, surviving isn't a great victory. It just means you outlasted some other schmucks, and the reward is small. There's not going to be huge stats, and the combat stats max out at 50%, meaning you're never going to be a combat beast. Not that that means a great deal in Call of Cthulhu, because almost every monster can't really be significantly hurt by you. It's very much meant to be, you have to go to extremes to take out some of the creatures, and understand that some of them just can't be killed. Call of Cthulhu is a nasty game, in case anybody hasn't found that out yet. So, to me, a role-playing game where you know your character is going to die should have some level of pathos to it to really get a connection. Otherwise, it's just a tactical exercise. And that's really all this is a tactical exercise. And to me, I'd rather pull out Massive Darkness and play that. That's a tactical exercise. If you tell me, well, I need you to make a character, your character's going to die, but is it serving any purpose? Just a one-shot exercise. So that's not what I do. But that being said, you guys have fun. I don't want to play it. I don't. I love role play, and characters that have a chance to survive and develop and move forward. This does not sound fun to me. But if you love this system, and a lot of people were in support of this. There's a lot of comments on that one that people are like, oh, I love this idea, I can't wait to use it, or yeah, we do stuff like this, and cool. And I very clearly said, I don't run this, I'm not interested in this, but if you like it, cool. I hope you have fun with it, because this is clearly something that there's a want for. And there are people who do enjoy it, and that's great that there's a game and somebody has this idea to run this, and it resonates. That's great. but it's just a different style, and it's a style I'm not at all interested in, and that's cool. It's fine. Now, if I had nothing else going on and somebody's like, hey, you want to do this game where we're going to kill everybody off? It's a pastime. It's like solo role-playing. It's something else to do, but I would do it with a certain amount of style. You know, when my character dies, I will come up with something, you know, to try and make it a little bit more memorable or interesting for me, but, you know, it's just not my thing. And that's fine. That's great. This idea can be translated to a lot of things. I know some people love death funnels and DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics. Take a bunch of zero-level characters, cram them into a dungeon, and see what gets out the other side of the meat grinder. Sure, okay, fine. It's not my thing, but I'm sure, you know, there's a lot of people who really like that, and cool. Have fun with that, guys. It's not for me, but you have fun. At least with the death funnel, there is the hope that there is an end of the tunnel without the artificial thing about I'm going to keep going till I kill everybody except for one person. There's no hope at the end of the tunnel except, you know, I hope I'm the last one, but you know. But at least with the death funnel, if you're good as a player and lucky, sometimes it just does come down to luck. If you're not surprised by that next monster and you actually do manage to, against all odds, hit it and kill it, or can get away from it, you know, there's the possibility that your character gets out and gets to be a first level character, and then you can really start telling the story. I guess that's the thing with me. It's just something you do so that you can actually get on to telling the story. So, yeah, okay, to each their own. But I'm not going to ever tell anybody that it's the wrong way to play. Never. I'm never going to tell anybody that there's no merit in that game, because there is. Clearly, people are enjoying it. This guy loves running it, taking off the kid gloves and going to town on players. The players seem to enjoy the battle of wits with each other as much as anybody, to be the last person yet alive. So have fun with it. Enjoy it. That is a special thing for you and your group. And if you enjoy that and you want to keep doing it, by all means keep doing it. Have fun. So. And again, just in case somebody actually pipes up, that's not really a role-playing game. This is just a tactical exercise. Well, those characters do have roles within the investigator broader field. You know, some people might be professors, and who knows, might learn something. Some people might be former soldiers or whatever, and be a little bit better at fighting or something. So there are still classes and roles to be played within that. So. Unless they're all, it's a professor run. Ugh. So, yes, it's still a role-playing game, and yes, if you have fun with it, by all means, continue doing it. Have fun. It's not something you're never going to find that in a State of the Dungeon address. I really don't think I'll ever run anything like that. So, that's my take on all the things that pop up in social media. Obviously, there's far more, but I think this is a good covering of some of the notable ones that I've seen in the recent past. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this. Maybe you've had a few of your own answers to things that you didn't even know you had questions to, but maybe we just enjoyed it. Hopefully. Thank you. I am Omnisci, and until next time, roll some dice, play some games, have some fun. Be safe. Thank you, and farewell.